Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Bright Spots. I am Lori Labishak, your happiness ambassador, here with episode 22 of Bright Spots. I am so excited for this evening's guest, and I think you're absolutely going to love the information that Dr. Rhoberta Shaler has to share with us tonight. And if you are joining us for the first time, please drop a message below. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you're joining us from past, please also drop a message. Let us know you're here, say hello. And as always, if you have questions or comments for our guests, don't hesitate to jump in there. We would really love to have a conversation with you. You know, when I started Bright Spots in April, I had no idea that it would continue for 23 weeks. I had no idea it would continue for 1 week, let alone this longevity that is happening. And I'm excited to announce that today I can say that we are international. I booked 3 guests from out of our country, Australia, British Columbia, and South Africa. And they will be coming up in October and November. So please be sure and come back each and every week for another guest right here on Bright Spots. Folks, these are people that are shining their light, doing things to improve the lives of others, and really making the world a brighter place. So I hope that you will come back. And if you believe you know a bright spot or you are a bright spot, please reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation with you as well. So this evening's guest, as I mentioned, is Dr. Rhoberta Shaler, and she comes to us from San Diego, California. That's right, folks. She is the relationship help doctor, and she offers urgent and ongoing care for relationships in crisis through counseling, speaking, video, and podcasting. She particularly focuses her expertise on partners, exes, adult children, and co-workers of the relentlessly difficult, disturbing people that she calls hijackals. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome my new friend, Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. Welcome, welcome. So good to have you.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be with you, Lori.
So, Rhoberta, tell us a little bit about how you got into relationship help and why. Why do you want to help people with their relationships?
Well, it's a very straightforward story. When I was little, I was the only child of 2 totally dysfunctional humans. And quite early on in that process, I learned that I was the only child of 2 dysfunctional humans, and I happened to be able to recognize it. So I was always looking for ways to make something that would work out, and that the messages they were giving me, is it the truth? So I was going into medicine. I was going to be a medical doctor, and I got diverted by having my first child, so I got a PhD in psychology and focused on relationships, and particularly conflict in relationships. And that grew into helping people who are in toxic relationships, which is kind of the ultimate conflict in relationships.
So when things go sideways and they get a little wonky, how do you know when you need help? What are the triggers to let someone know that they need help?
Well, smart people wake up early, and that doesn't mean that they get help. But here's the statistic. The average couple will wait 7 years with the same problem before they get help. So if you understand that and you realize, hey, I really wouldn't like to spend 7 years before this is solved, I don't want to be one of those statistics. So you might say, you know, honey, I think we need help. Or I think this could be way better than it is. So let's see what's going on there. Now, that's when they come to see me. They see me globally because I have clients all over the world through video. But they know that it's a persistent problem they're having. They know that it goes sideways, as you said, frequently around the same issue. It's an ongoing debate, an ongoing fear, an ongoing place in the relationship where you're walking on eggshells, and it really needs a solution. So that's a difficult relationship in the sense that there is an issue. It is not going to go away. You haven't been able to solve it on your own, or you would have by now. Sometimes, though, we have things that are one-ups. You go through a rough patch. Things are a little difficult for a little bit, but you solve it and it doesn't recur again. But the ones that recur are the ones you need help with.
So you make a specific distinction between difficult relationships and chronically difficult relationships. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Sure, every person is somebody's idea of a difficult person every now and again. You don't do what I want you to do. You don't do it in the time frame I want you to do it. You know, all of those things. That is a momentary difficulty. It's something that we get over. Maybe it happens once a year, twice a year. But if you're in a relentlessly, chronically difficult relationship, it is going to happen all the time. And you get smaller and they get bigger. And you start to diminish, you start to be contained, you start to not speak up, you don't know how to solve the problem, perhaps. But you begin to feel as though you cannot have any kind of equality. Now, I talk about the 3 must-haves of healthy adult relationships, Lori, and those 3 things are equality, reciprocity, and mutuality. And I talk about those for people who want to hear them on my podcast, Save Your Sanity. You can go to saveyourSanityPodcast.com, and there's a whole episode just on those ones. And so if you don't have equality, reciprocity, and mutuality in your relationship, you have no foundation on which to build. So the first thing that you need to know is, am I in a relationship where my partner has an interest in building equality, reciprocity, and mutuality? Now, if you're with a hijackal, one of these relentlessly difficult people that I have given this trademark term to, they have no interest in equality, reciprocity, and mutuality. They have an interest in winning, in being right, in always being the one who gets their way. And so those are the kind of distinctions that you make between being somebody's idea of a difficult person someday, one day, and then people who are relentlessly and chronically difficult most of the time.
So you talked about hijackals, the term that you created for chronically difficult people. So how do you know if you're with one or perhaps you are one?
Well, you're probably not going to know if you are one because you think you're perfect already and there's just nothing wrong with you. So if you're with a person who thinks they have no faults and turns everything onto you, you're probably with a hijackal or a person with hijackal tendencies. Now, why I created that term is that as a mental health professional myself, I don't want people to think that they have a need to diagnose others because they don't have the competence to diagnose them. But the patterns, the traits, the cycles are very identifiable along with the behaviors. So I wanted a term to say, well, that's hijackal behavior. And that's why I trademarked that term. And my definition of a hijackal is a person who hijacks a relationship for their own purposes and then relentlessly scavenges it for power, status, and control. So if you're with someone who always has to win, they always have to be right, you have to be diminished. You say, you said yesterday you would do that. They don't say, oh, did I? They say, you don't listen very well, do you? I mean, they turn it back on you. They will not accept any responsibility or be accountable in any way for anything that could be perceived as a difficulty or a shortcoming. So the need to win is one big thing. The second is everything will be your fault, including the weather. You can count on that. They will always be looking for a way to have power over you, control over you. They will want to, I was in a relationship with a hijackal. I remember he wanted all of the labels on everything in the cupboards to face the same way in alphabetical order. And if it wasn't like that, it was going to be a constant irritant. And he had to have it like that. Now, he had a lot of other hijackal hallmarks, but that was one thing. It had to be his way. There was no cupboard that was not alphabetized and everything perfect. And if there happened to be something out of place, there was going to be a problem. So winning, and they also involve what we call all or nothing thinking. One moment you are the best thing that ever happened to them. You look at them sideways. Now you're the worst scum of the earth. There are no areas between love you dearly, you're the best thing that happened to me, and who would want you because you're the scum of the earth. So we call that all or nothing thinking. So that means that I'm in the relationship or I'm out of the relationship. And you can have no conversation about how could we fix the relationship. So these are some of the hallmarks that you will find in hijackals.
So, Dr. Shaler, what is the first thing a person should do if they identify that they are in a relationship with a hijackal? What are their first steps?
Well, the first thing is to take a big breath and say, oh my, maybe it is not my fault. I've been being told repeatedly I'm not good enough, I don't do things well enough, I'm not taking good enough care of them. Maybe it's not my fault. And that can be a big moment when you step back and you get a little perspective on it and you realize that. So there's a good beginning. And then you start to look at the patterns and the cycles that you're running through. You start to notice that this happens every time. The conversation goes sideways, that this plays every time. So you start to learn some new communication skills. When people come to me and they say, I think I'm with a hijackal, they often want to make sure that they are. So their first interactions with me will be telling me exactly what the patterns, traits, and cycles of the person are. And then we can determine, do they have hijackal tendencies or are they actually a hijackal? And then what are the next best steps? How do you educate yourself? How do you turn yourself around? How do you get your power back? How do you increase your self-confidence? How do you speak up for yourself even though they don't like it?
So, is it necessary to leave a hijackal if you identify that you are in a relationship with a hijackal? Is it necessary or even good to leave the relationship?
Well, if you're with a full-blown hijackal, you're probably going to want to leave. Every situation is different, though. It depends if you have children, the age of the children, how the finances are run, who has the power over the finances, what the living situation is, who works, who doesn't work, who has the better paying job. What stage are you at in the relationship? Have you tried to work on it? Have you fully identified that this is a person who maybe has hijackal tendencies but is open to learning some new skills? Maybe they'll come as a couple and we'll work on that first. Other times you maybe work with me privately and it's clear that person has all the hijackal tendencies. If you have children, you have to ask yourself, is this the model I want for my children to see that this is how a relationship runs? There are all kinds of permutations and of different qualities that we have to look at when making a decision whether to leave or whether to stay, or when to leave or if to leave. The most important thing is, first of all, to get yourself empowered and back on track in the relationship. I always tell my folks, unless there's physical or sexual abuse, re-empower yourself while in the relationship. Learn new skills, learn new ways of being, learn new ways of self-care, learn to set boundaries, learn to hold and maintain those boundaries, learn to have consequences for those boundaries. Practice that while you're in the dysfunctional relationship. And then as you gather that confidence, then you will be able to make a decision as you see the result of doing that. Is there change? Is there movement in the relationship? Did it get a little bit better? Are the children happier? Are there fewer fights? If that's the case, maybe we can continue your growth so that your influence in the relationship makes it tenable. But many times, the only thing that you can do is to leave, because it's just going to be more of the same and it will only get worse.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just joining us, this is Bright Spots, and our guest this evening is the relationship help doctor, Dr. Rhoberta Shaler, a PhD from San Diego, California. And we're talking about her term, the hijackals. And Dr. Shaler, so what is it that makes you attractive to a hijackal?
Oh, they can almost sense you coming. As if you have had a hijackal parent, then you are already groomed to accept a hijackal partner. So they can sense whether you're malleable. They can sense if you're a good person, meaning that you're going to go the extra mile. You're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're going to justify their behavior. You're going to rationalize their behavior. You're going to make excuses for them. They're going to love bomb you for a while. They all do that, to make sure that you think they're the best thing that ever happened to you. They'll be attentive. They will listen really well. They will give you the right gifts. They will take you the right places. They will say the right things. They will promise things. One thing you want to look out for in a hijackal is they always want to go too quickly in a relationship. These are the kind of people who say, I know we just met, but I know I love you and I'm going to want to marry you as soon as possible. Those are moves that say, I want power over you as quickly as possible. So it's very important to see these things. And if that's attractive to you, like, oh, I've been waiting for the love of my life and this person professes they love me, let me jump in with that one. No, 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 no. Very important, or big red flag.
Right. So what can you do to stop the pattern of interaction? What does it take?
Well, first of all, it takes you thinking you're worth it. Because by the time you start to recognize this, you've been worn down and torn down, and you're probably emotionally exhausted. So you've got to be able to get some perspective and pick yourself up and say, I deserve to be in a relationship that is equal, reciprocal, and mutual. And I am really not willing to settle for less, and I don't want my children to see a model of less. And that may be the starting point for you, or you may have been hit, you may have been hurt, you may have been abandoned, you may have been discarded and the person's run off, and you think, oh, what did I do? But in actual fact, they've been grooming someone on the side and they've gone off to be with them for a while. So it's very important to immerse yourself in learning what hijackals do, which is why, when you go to my podcast, Save Your Sanity, you can learn so much about how to identify, how to recognize a hijackal, and also to really get into touch with, yeah, that's just how I feel. I had no idea that's what was causing it. Hijackals like to isolate you. They like to marginalize you. They like to be the one who separates you from your family. You can notice that as well. They'll say, oh, let's move 400 miles away and we'll live out in the country. Romantic notion. Seems like you're being taken off by Prince Charming or Princess Charming. However, the actual fact is, let me get them in isolation where they're dependent on me and they can have less ability to leave. These are really important things to see, and you have to open your eyes and get some help. And whether that help comes, many times people will tell me that they've listened to 40 podcasts before they talk to me, because they just needed to really believe it, that it was happening to them.
So, Dr. Shaler, we have a question from one of our listeners or one of our watchers. Jamie Yater asks, with professional help, is it possible for a hijackal to change?
Well, let me say this, Jamie. There's a wonderful joke. How many psychotherapists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is only one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. And the same thing is true with hijackals. And believe me, they don't want to change because they're perfect. They're flawless. There's nothing wrong with them. It's all your fault. So a true hijackal, an identifiable or a diagnosable hijackal, will definitely not change. But people who have been raised by a hijackal and don't know any other way and are unhappy and can say, I know I'm not doing this very well. I hate myself when I rage. I don't like all of this. They're the people who would say, well, maybe I could learn another way. And we can expand their repertoire and teach them new skills to be in a relationship. And they're happy. They're thrilled. They don't feel like they're miserable or they're making someone else miserable. But that's a very small percentage of people who present with hijackal traits.
Thank you for your question, Jamie. We really appreciate it. If you're just tuning in, this is Bright Spots, and our guest this evening is Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. You can learn more about Dr. Shaler's work at forrelationshiphelp.com. All of the information is there for her podcast, Save Your Sanity. And she told me off the air that they just hit 500,000 downloads of her podcast. So congratulations to Dr. Shaler with her success. We do have another question from one of our watchers. Lisa McCluskey from Tennessee asks, are there certain professions that attract that type or hijackal?
Yes, if you want to have a shocking little look at something, Lisa, just go to Google and put in psychopath careers. And you will see the top 10 careers that attract hijackals. And that's kind of scary because it is as you would think. Once you look at that list, you think, oh, every one of those professions, that person has power over other humans. And so any profession that allows you to have power over other humans is something that a hijackal says, oh, yes, I want some of that. I was speaking a few years ago at the California HR conference on this topic, and about halfway through the seminar, a person put up their hand and they said, well, what happens to hijackals in the workplace? And I said, well, brace yourself. They get promoted. And everybody had that nervous laughter because they're promoted because the person in charge of the division they're in or the department or team they're on doesn't want them anymore. So the only way to get rid of them is a lateral or vertical promotion. And so that's what happens to them. But yes, I mean, there are careers that they particularly like, and those are why you will find that people who have healthy narcissism, which all children have, and healthy narcissism means that I feel really, really good about myself, but not to the point of making myself more important than other humans. So there is that little side that says, yes, I recognize my strengths. I recognize what I do well, and I persist in doing that. But you'll often find that people who go out and find and create their own companies do that because they can have a wonderful idea and have ultimate power over everything that happens there. And people will get trapped in that culture sometimes. So it's about having careers and career paths and kinds of interests that allow you to have power over others. You might note that on that list are clergy, for instance. That might be a surprise, but power over others. So that's the way that rolls.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. So if someone is watching or listening and they just, from listening to what you've been saying, they've identified that they are in a relationship with a hijackal and they want to stop the crazy making, what are their first steps?
Well, I think I said earlier that the first thing is the moment when you go, whoa, I'm not crazy. This really is happening. Oh, look, maybe you go to my website and you read all the things. That's happening, and that's happening, and that's happening. And then, oh, there's a pattern here. And I really am participating in this pattern. So the first thing is to withdraw a little bit from the pattern. Now, if you're with a hijackal, one that you're in a supposedly romantic relationship with, they're not very romantic. Hijackals don't have love to give you, but they definitely have uses for you. But in the beginning, they do what we call love bombing. So they will be that perfect person and say all the right things just to get you. You know, I've written a lot of books, and in Escaping the Hijackal Trap, there's a whole chapter called the gotcha factor, which is what they do to get you and nail you down, so make it as difficult as possible for you to get away. And so it's important for understanding that if you get into one of these situations, you have to first recognize, all right, this is the situation I'm in. I have to be able to name the traits and patterns that I am seeing. I have to be then reflective of what's my part in that. Am I enabling that? Am I allowing that to go on because I don't know what to say? Well, I could learn what to say. Do I have any boundaries? Am I expressing them? If I do express them, am I maintaining them? And there are consequences for walking over them, because that's a place where people fall down a lot. They set a boundary, but then there's no consequence if the person tramples on that boundary. So the important thing is to get some support. You know, that's why I do what I do. I have a membership site where people can come and be in groups, and I have all of my programs and things so that you can become aware of what has happened. You can reflect on, is this something that maybe I was raised with and it's just comfortably uncomfortable, and all of a sudden my eyes are open and say, I don't want this anymore. I can do much better and have something healthy. I do not have to settle for unhealthy. I don't have to settle for being worn down and torn down by another human being, belittled or discounted, or being told that I'm foolish or unwise or have thin skin or I'm too sensitive or ask too much. You know, these are all things that hijackals will say to you because you're a bit of a bother if you're not giving them everything that they want. So you have to smarten up, and they're happy to tell you how.
So, Dr. Shaler, are hijackals always a couple? Is it always a couple, or could it be a friend? Could a friend also, or a perceived friend, also be a hijackal? And does that look different? And how does that manifest itself?
Well, a friend, of course, it can be a friend. It can be your parent, and you know, it could be your sibling. It could be your adult child. The thing is that proximity makes a difference. If you're seeing them all the time, like you would if you were in a supposedly romantic relationship, that's different than seeing them occasionally, like a friend, where you can create some distance. Maybe if you have someone in your life that is a hijackal, then you are probably going to have more than one person in your life when you look a little more deeply. The more you learn about it, the more you'll see that you've been willing to accommodate these people. So yes, it could be a friend, and that friend starts out being so interested in you, and then pretty soon you notice the ratio in a conversation. Like, I have an old friend, we've been friends, you know, a long-time friend, I guess we should say, not an old friend, but, you know, we met when we were young mothers, and I was still in the situation because I was raised by hijackals. I divorced a hijackal. I was raising my children alone, and I didn't have the discretionary ability that I have now, and so I didn't really notice that, you know, she does have a tendency to talk about herself all the time. And so recently it was her birthday, and we were having a conversation. We don't have many, and I just noticed the ratio, which was about 25-75. How are you doing? I would say to her. She would talk. Then she'd say, and how about you? I'd say one sentence, and she'd say, oh, yeah, that happened to me too. So you start to notice these kinds of things. Once you start to see the patterns and you start to realize, yes, I felt like that. Or yes, that person does that all the time. Oh, and that person does too. Oh, my goodness, I don't want this anymore. As you wake up to this and you start to, you know, dust yourself off and get your feathers in order, and you start to realize that you probably have more than one because they have seen that you're willing to put up with it. Or maybe they've groomed you to put up with it. So it could be, like I said, a friend. It could be a sibling. It could be a parent. It could be an adult child. Maybe you divorced a hijackal, as I did, you know, and one of the children took after that hijackal. And they are just as nasty. They are just as deceitful. They are just as manipulative. They are just as needing to be in control as the other parent. And at that point, well, that's interesting, but I'm not interested in talking to that person. And that person's not interested in talking to me, especially with what I do. So, those things happen, and it's sad and it's unfortunate, but we just have to look at this is how relationships roll. And if we want to be healthy and empowered, we have to be aware.
Thank you, Dr. Shaler. If you are tuning in and you've just joined us, this is Bright Spots, and our guest this evening is Dr. Rhoberta Shaler, PhD, the Relationship Help Doctor. And before we move on from hijackals, have we missed anything on this topic?
Oh, I'm sure we've missed 150,000 things. I mean, there's so many permutations of what happens, but I think we've hit the high spots, the ways that you could identify most commonly that that's the case. And I hope we've made it really clear that it is never going to be equitable, reciprocal, or mutual. So don't be expecting it to change one day when you think that you have given that person enough nurturing and they feel stable and they feel loved and they know you're never going anywhere, and all of a sudden they'll magically change. No, you've changed. You've become smaller and smaller and smaller, and they have power over you now. So expand and take up your space again, and then make some good decisions.
That's wonderful. So I'd like to move on to your book, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Kaizen for Couples.
Yeah, that's it. There you go.
That's it. Aha, there's the book, folks. And you can find that at forrelationshiphelp.com. All of Dr. Shaler's resources are there, including her Save Your Sanity podcast. You're going to want to go and listen to some of those. Those are really, really great. So this is a relationship help, tips for relationships and relationship advice. Shift your relationship from acceptable to exceptional. Why'd you write the book?
I wrote the book because I've been seeing couples for about 35 years, and it was 2014. Someone said to me, "Where did you write all these things down?" And I said, "Well, I actually haven't." So I sat down and wrote the book. And because it's everything that I teach people about healthy relationships, whether they're couples or not. But Kaizen is a Japanese word which means small, continuous, consistent improvement. And so I wanted small steps that would help people move in the direction of a healthy, sustainable, well-functioning, mutual, equal, and reciprocal relationship. So I put everything in there, Lori.
It sounds like a great book. So what are the major issues that most couples find difficult to resolve on their own?
Well, things will go sideways, as I said earlier in our time together, that will become things that happen too frequently, and we avoid them when we start detouring around them, and they become the elephant in the room or what we've swept under the carpet too frequently, and we keep tripping on it. So it may be that there's a lack of respect, or there's a lack of honesty. Like in Kaizen for Couples, I talk about 5 relational gifts, and you have to have them within yourself and in your relationship with yourself, because you can't give a gift you don't have. So you need to develop these 5 things within yourself to make sure you're treating yourself that way, so that you then know that you have it to contribute to a relationship. What those 5 things are honesty, safety, trust, respect, and reliability. So are you honest with yourself? Are you safe with yourself? Do you treat yourself in a respectful way? Are you reliable? Do you keep your promises to yourself? So these things become very, very important. And that's the basis that you may have fallen short on. This may be what you're walking around that is the elephant in the middle of your room, that you no longer feel respected, or your conversation is denigrated to something that feels like verbal abuse.
So, in your book, you state these days many couples start their supposedly committed relationships with conditionally committed behaviors and mindsets. Then they wonder why they run into difficulties. Why do you feel that way?
Well, if you have already closed your mind to something, it has to be a certain way. There are only these conditions in which I'll be happy. Yes, it's good to know yourself. But if you're opening yourself to someone else, there has to be three entities in every relationship, two me's and a we. And things have to be done in a relationship that sometimes are to the benefit of one or the other me's, or sometimes neither me gets exactly what they want, but we do it because it's the best thing for the we. And if we don't have that understanding, then we can get into a situation that is fighting over me versus me all the time and forgetting the we and not being willing to compromise. And I talk about it in the book because I talk about what I call the hokey pokey relationship. People get into the relationship and they've got one foot in and one foot out, and that's what it's all about. So they're thinking, well, if it doesn't work out, I can get out of here. Well, that's true, but that's not a great way to go into a relationship. You want to go into the relationship believing that you're going to work things out, you're going to work things through, you're going to be curious about your partner, you're going to be interested in your partner, you're going to expand and enrich your understanding of your partner and relationship, you're going to have great conversation, you're going to learn to manage and control conflict, resolve conflict, all of these things. I honestly believe that a healthy relationship with the three must-haves is probably the most exciting, enriching journey that you can go on in your lifetime. And it will certainly bring you the greatest rewards. But it won't happen if you are going into it with a conditioned mindset that it has to be my way or the highway.
What do you believe is the most important thing couples can learn from your book, Kaizen for Couples?
Well, first of all, chapters 6 and 7, the chapters 6 and 7 are all about the personal weather report. And that's a technique that I developed. And, it's the third most important thing that I can teach anybody. There's a whole chapter on how to give one, and there's a whole chapter on how to respond to one. And learning that, Lori, is so important. To know yourself well enough to be able to express what you're thinking, feeling, needing, wanting. And to know that you have the right to take up space and draw breath. That can be big for some people who are thinking that they're kind of pressed against the edges of the earth. That you actually have the right to take up space and draw breath. Therefore, you have the right to engage in my definition of assertiveness, which is you have the right to say what you think, feel, need, want, remember, or prefer, as long as you do not mention another human by name or pronoun. So when you master the personal weather report and you can speak about yourself in depth because you come from a place of clarity and awareness and self-reflection, then you have that to offer to the relationship, to the development of the we.
Wow, that is pretty deep. That you've made me want to read your book for sure. So, people listening or watching this evening, they may struggle with not feeling heard, appreciated, or accepted in their relationships. What's the best advice on how they can deal with that?
Okay, well, you're reading half of the sentence list that's
Okay.
in the book. So I talk about in there that every person has the right and the longing to feel seen, heard, known, accepted, appreciated, and acknowledged. And if you aren't having that, that's a big first thing to notice. If someone isn't listening to you, that means that their brain is engaged, their eyes are looking at you, and they're hearing you. Hearing is never enough. Listening is imperative. And that they are with you in the conversation. That's a big deal. So if someone isn't with you in the conversation, they're not fully engaged with you, they're proximate to you, not present. I talk about that in the book. Proximity, not so engaging for a good relationship. It's presence. It's being fully there for each other. It's being able to sit down and have eye contact and know this is our time and we both want to invest in it. These are very important things. So when you want to develop depth in relationship, first of all, you have to spend some time there. And then you have to spend some quality time there. And that can be scary because you have to be vulnerable. And you need to be safe to be vulnerable. So you have to determine if you're safe. And then if you can be vulnerable, you can develop emotional intimacy. Because now you have your person, like in Grey's Anatomy. That's my person. We should have this one person if you're in a romantic relationship with them and you plan to stay with them for a long, long time. They should be safe. So you have to establish those conditions in the relationship. Am I safe? Well, if I'm not safe in the relationship, then I'd better be quiet. Don't tell them too much because they'll weaponize it and use it against you. Hijackals do that all the time. They like to create a really cozy little environment and, maybe have a little wine and make you feel like, oh, he or she is back and they love me and this is the person I fell in love with. Then they have a little conversation and say something like, well, most people don't know, but I'm afraid of the dark. Oh, honey, I didn't know that about you. Then you get out of that environment, you're at a dinner party, and then the hijackal says, well, don't think she's so strong. She's afraid of the dark. They weaponize your vulnerability. So you have to know that you're safe. And if you have that person in your life that you are safe with, that has your back, walks beside you, supports you, will lead the way when you need them to, that you have those things, there is nothing more precious. But you do have to know how to calibrate that.
So during the pandemic, a lot of people turned to Zoom and, the internet to do business. I'm guessing you've been using the internet for a while to do business. So how has that changed the way people seek help for relationship issues or personal issues? Has it changed the way people get help?
Well, I think it probably has with other people. I've been doing it online for 6 years. So that because my clientele is international, I needed to do it. And in 2017, I just gave up 1,200 square feet of office. Everybody sees me by video. And that's great. And I'm sure other professionals weren't as lucky as me to have that already established. And that was their business model. But yes, of course, this is a wonderful way to be able to talk with people. And yes, every now and again, it'd be nice to be able to hug them. But the rest of it works just fine because it is about being able to see each other in space, maintain eye contact, watch facial expressions, see the body posture, hear the words, hear the pace, hear the volume, hear the words chosen, and understand what people are about, what they are avoiding, and what they're longing for that they haven't got. And you can certainly do that by video.
And if you had one piece of advice for couples this evening, what would it be?
Well, aside from always remember there are 3 entities in the relationship, the most important thing that I can tell anyone is remember that this formula, ABB, always believe behavior. We have a tendency to want to believe words when the words don't match the behavior because we so much want to believe it's true. When someone tells us they care, or they love us, or they're going to change, or they have changed. But you must always, with any human, always believe behavior because our behavior is our belief. You can say anything, but what you behave is a demonstration of what you really believe.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you are just tuning in, this is Bright Spots, and our guest this evening is Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. And if you'd like more information, you can go to forrelationshiphelp.com and learn all about Dr. Shaler and her podcast and all of her books and services that she has to offer. So, Dr. Shaler, you also have done some work on improving workplace and community relationships. Healthy relationships require assertiveness, is the comment that you've made. What do you mean by that?
Well, I've alluded to it earlier. It means that sometimes you have to have the willingness and the ability, having done the work, to speak up and say what you think, feel, need, and want, and believe that you have the right to say that as long as you do not mention another human by name or pronoun. And I think it's very important in the workplace or community groups or whatever. Why do you belong if you don't have a voice? Why are you hired if it's not for your thoughts and expertise and things that you can point out? But you will not feel like you're contributing if you don't speak up. So very important is to find out, if you're not speaking up, why not? What is it that you don't feel confident or comfortable contributing? Do you need to improve your self-confidence? Do you need help to think things through? What do you need to feel that you are a valuable person to the organization and that you can make a contribution? And that actually is your right and why you're participating.
So many people might find being assertive difficult. Why is that?
Well, many people like to please other people. They're very, very afraid that other people won't like them if they just tell them what they think and feel and need and want. So, it's like sort of, is it okay if I'm me? And people come from that place of checking, like, will you still like me if I say what I really think? And that's why it becomes very important to be a good communicator, so that you can use the personal weather report and know that you can speak about yourself with authority. Nobody can tell you you're wrong when you speak about yourself. And if they try, should be a red flag. There are lots and lots of red flags that I talk about. And if somebody tells you that, oh, I love this one. If somebody says, I know you better than you know yourself, big, big, big red flag. Nobody knows you better than you know yourself. So it's very important to understand that kind of dynamic.
So going back to your book, Kaizen for Couples, you give a strategy that exemplifies your definition of assertiveness. Have you already shared that with us? And if not, would you share it with it? Maybe you could reinforce it.
Sure. My definition of assertiveness is when you know that you have the right to take up space and draw breath. You are an empowered human being. And then you will know that you have the right to say what you think, feel, need, want, prefer, and remember, as long as you do not mention another human by name or pronoun. So the personal weather report is you speaking about what's going on within you. That's what you share with the world. You have the right to share that. That's you. That's uniquely you. That's your perception. That's how you put together everything that you've learned in life. That's how you integrate your experiences. And that's your contribution to the world. And as you do it, the way in which you do it is your personality. So you have that right. But if you've been raised by hijackals, you've been with a hijackal, maybe you've been raised in a situation where you didn't feel confident speaking up, or that you knew you needed to be passive in order to make it through living with your family, something happened, do take the opportunity to become a fully realized adult. Really enjoy being able to be a fully realized and actualized adult that knows that you have that right to say what's going on with you, and that other people do not get to question it, because you presented it in a way that was assertive, that said, this is what I think, feel, need, want, remember, prefer. And you are the authority on you. You're not asking for permission. You're not asking them if it's all right with them if you have those feelings. And you have to grow into that often. because we get a little thwarted. Sometimes we kind of miss a turn going from childhood to teenage to adult. Sometimes we didn't come into ourselves. Maybe it's the family we came from, or maybe something happened, or maybe we were with a person who didn't allow us to fully express or wasn't interested in us fully expressing. But look at your journey and say, if I missed that one, I want to go back and find that. If I went off on some rabbit hole or cul-de-sac, I want to go back and find myself the pathway to being an empowered adult.
So what happens if assertiveness is not present in a relationship, couples, friends, work? What happens if it's not there?
Well, you'll feel resentful if you don't speak up, and you'll feel like you don't matter, and you will feel trampled on and put down and taken advantage of, and that will build your resentment. And other people won't get the benefit of your presence. They won't get the benefit of your experience or your expertise or your thoughts or your feelings. And the equation is incomplete. You know, it's important for us to take up space and draw breath. Many times, Lori, I say to my clients, you know, we used to take Polaroid photographs. So I'll use that as an example. I would say to them, go out and take a Polaroid photograph of yourself in nature. And then bring it home and erase yourself. And there'll be a hole there. We have to think of ourselves as taking up space in this world, and that we have that right. And without our being there, there would be a hole there. And our unique character, personality, contribution, consciousness is our opportunity to show up and share. And if we don't fully inhabit that, we won't fully inhabit emotional intimacy. And if we don't fully inhabit emotional intimacy with ourselves, we won't have it to give to a relationship. The relationship then will get lopsided. It'll go sideways. It will have resentment in it. It'll have resignation in it. It'll have anger in it. It'll have maybe seething rage at the very bottom that, if not expressed, will turn into depression. There are all kinds of nasty things that happen if we don't fully inhabit who we are and have the opportunity and accord ourselves the opportunity of expressing it.
So, Dr. Shaler, being positively assertive is certainly desirable and builds influence. But what do you say to the people that are afraid of being assertive for fear that folks will see them as aggressive and find it as a negative as opposed to a positive?
Sure. Well, if you follow my definition of assertiveness, they're not going to see you as aggressive. How they see you as aggressive is when you start talking about them. You should do this. You shouldn't do that. You're bad. You should have thought more of that. That's aggressive. When I'm going to tell you what you should do or who you are. And if you look in the hijackal literature, you'll find that's gaslighting. I want to define your reality for you. So when that happens, you don't allow it. No, that's not true. That's just not true.
Okay, good. So we're going to talk just a minute about your book, Wrestling Rhinos, and I love the title, Conquering Conflict in the Wilds of Work. So you talk about passive aggressiveness. What is that, and what does that endanger in all relationships?
Well, I've written 2 books on passive aggressiveness, so I'm happy to tell you about that. Passive aggressiveness is, in my definition, sneaky anger. It's when a person doesn't want to tell the truth in the moment because they don't want the conflict. So they gloss it over, or they agree to do something. If we want a concrete example, will you do that for me? Like in one of my books, I talk about the hijackal to whom I was previously married. And I used to do a lot of speaking, so I was on the road a lot. And I remember one time coming and saying, you know, I'm coming in on Saturday night on a plane, and I won't have time to get my dry cleaning before I fly out on Monday morning. Would you get the dry cleaning for me? Yeah, sure, I'll get it, no problem. And I took the time and said, you know, you understand that I won't have the time and I need those clothes. Yeah, I get it. Don't worry, I'll get your dry cleaning. So agreement in the moment, I checked, I made sure it was fine, I double checked. So I come home on Saturday night and I'm saying, I'm having trouble finding my dry cleaning. He said, I have better things to do than go on errands for you. That's passive aggression. That means I'll tell you in the moment because I don't want the conflict. I'll tell you I'm going to do it. I have no intention of doing it or being it, but it'll get you off my back in this moment, and I'll postpone the anger till another time. Passive aggression is always about procrastination, pushing off conflict, pushing off a negative emotion, pushing off doing anything, and then hoping that I won't have to pay the price for having said I'd do it and I'm not going to do it. So passive aggression shows up in things that we say to each other, like, well, doesn't look like you looked in the mirror before you got up, before you went to work this morning. We say things to each other that are passive aggressive. It's underlying sneaky anger. Tell me if you don't like what I'm wearing, but don't put it into the context of, well, it looks like you missed the mirror this morning. I mean, that's just nasty. So passive aggressive has many, many components. I've written about it a lot. I've got a book called Stop That's Crazy Making, How to Quit Playing the Passive Aggressive Game. And I have another book called The Hijackal Trap, The Hidden Nature of Passive Aggression. All hijackals are passive aggressive, but not all passive aggressive people are hijackals. So very important to know, but it'll always be a component of a hijackal.
Dr. Shaler, it has been a pleasure to have you on Bright Spots this evening. And you do video conferencing all across the world. If someone that is watching is interested in working with you, what is the next best step for them to reach out?
Well, the next best step, if you're a new client, is to go to beaclient.com. Yes, that is my website, beaclient.com. And I offer new clients a full hour for only $97. That allows people to know whether or not they want to work with me and for me to know if I can help them. And then after we have that, then I offer packages, which are nowhere on my website because I want to know we're good together first. But I offer packages of 8, 12, or 16 sessions following that initial, very inexpensive first hour.
Okay, so it is beaclient.com. And if you're interested in any of the books that Dr. Shaler spoke about this evening or tuning into her podcast, tell us again the name of the podcast.
Go to SaveYourSanityPodcast.com or what's on the screen. Everything, including my free ebook, How to Spot a Hijackal. You can find everything at forrelationshiphelp.com. There's just some other ways like beaclient.com that are faster. You don't have to look very far because that'll take you to the exact page.
All right, folks. So there you have it. ForRelationshipHelp.com will give you everything you need to connect with Dr. Shaler or to learn more about her books and her podcasts and the services that she provides. Dr. Shaler, I thank you so much. I trust that the temperature remains below 100 for you for the next few days. And you stay hydrated and keep the air conditioning running. Thank you so much for joining us on Bright Spots. I wish you the very best. And ladies and gentlemen, please be sure and come back each and every week on Wednesday evenings for another episode of Bright Spots, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And it has been a pleasure to have you. Next week, we have another great guest, and I'll see you then. God bless.